Hi, this is John Horgan. This podcast is an outgrowth of my new book, Mind-Body Problems, which is about the deepest mystery of existence, the human mind. You can read it for free online at mindbodyproblems.com. The book profiles 9 thinkers exploring connections between their personal lives and their theories. On the podcast, I talk to subjects of my book and other mind-body experts. In this episode, I talked to biologist Robert Trivers, who lives on a mountaintop in Jamaica. He has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He is also one of the greatest scientists who ever lived. My chapter about him is called He-Town. Read my book if you want to know what the title means. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hi, this is John Horgan. I am an occasional science correspondent for Meaning of Life TV. And with me today is a really amazing guest. I'm thrilled to have him here. All the way from the island of Jamaica in the Caribbean is the great evolutionary biologist, Robert Trivers. So first of all, just welcome, Bob.
Thank you, John. Happy to see you again.
So can you say exactly where you are right now?
Well, if this is Jamaica, then Kingston is here, Mo Bay is up here, and I'm here. That is, I'm on the south coast, same side as Kingston, and about equidistant from Kingston to Montego Bay. But I usually fly out of Montego Bay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm about 1,700 feet up from the ocean at a famous beauty spot, which, am I allowed to move this and show you the beauty spot or not?
Yeah, sure. Sure, go ahead.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
You see that?
Yeah. Yeah, there it is. The beautiful Caribbean.
Yeah, and this is about 1,700 feet up, and then it's more or less straight down, right?
Yeah.
So Lover's Leap, supposedly 2 slaves left off here when the master wanted to send away female slave to himself. So the 2 of them leapt off and landed in the ocean. Of course, they couldn't land in the ocean, but they would have killed themselves. So this is Lover's Leap.
Right.
And my home is about a mile around the other direction. So you can see in that direction.
Yeah, I remember it well because when I visited you, when my girlfriend, I'm going to call her Emily, she's very private, so she doesn't like me to use her real name. Emily and I visited you 2 summers ago, and you gave us a tour of we stayed at your house, and you also gave us a tour of your neighborhood, and you took us to Lover's Leap and were telling us the story about it and pointing out where you had swum with your family when your kids were really young. Just down, you could see the spot from the top of the cliff.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks for the quick tour now. I just wanted to tell people, to remind people who you are. You are, I don't want to embarrass you with praise, but you are one of the greatest biologists ever, especially one of the greatest evolutionary biologists. So in the 1970s, you had several papers, one on reciprocal altruism, another on parental investment, and another on parent-offspring conflict, that were these landmark papers that then helped jumpstart the field of sociobiology, which eventually evolved to become evolutionary psychology. And they sort of laid this foundation for this modern enterprise of trying to understand human nature human behavior, human thought in evolutionary terms. Stephen
By the
Pinker,
way, John,
pardon me?
If you don't mind me interrupting here.
No, anytime.
I dislike the term sociobiology. That was invented by Ed Wilson.
Right.
So that he could become the father of sociobiology. No, he was the father of the term sociobiology. Then again, evolutionary psychology was invented by or popularized by Tooby and Cosmides, who are out at UC Santa Barbara. And they talked about the environment of evolutionary adaptation, EEA, and so forth. Now, in both of those cases, they're in fact shrinking the field that I worked on, which is just part of biology. It's just part of evolutionary biology. So here's the thing, John. There was virtually no social theory based on natural selection, and natural selection is the key concept in all of biology. If you're interested in viruses, go to natural selection. If you're interested in human evolutionary genetics, go to natural selection. You always go to natural selection. So, but for 110 years since Darwin, field had been undeveloped because they immediately embraced this nonsense that traits evolve for the good of the species. And that's especially easy mistake to make when they're social traits.
Right.
Because if I'm doing something nice for you, well, it's good for the species. Blah, blah, blah.
This would be group selection, right?
What's that?
This is the concept of group selection. Yeah.
Group selection was the more sophisticated, in a way, attempt to rescue this line of reasoning. But originally, it was just species selection, Traits evolved for the good of the species. No, they evolved for the good of the individuals possessing the traits, where good is described as number of surviving offspring. So, in 1964, Hamilton generalized kinship theory. So now we had kinship. In 1930, Fisher had done sex ratio theory. So we knew that selection pressures acting on the two sexes were equally strong. Very important concept. And we knew the general logic for sex ratios per se. And then Fisher also came up with the term reproductive value, which allowed us to factor age as a variable into equations. So I'm a first year graduate student at Harvard. I'm saying, field is wide open. So kinship is not the only reason for being nice to another human being. There's also reciprocity. There's friendship.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I always started with humans and then they argued out. And that was partly because I'd never had a biology course before I went back to Harvard as a special student to take 8 biology courses in order to get admitted to graduate school in biology. But it was also, what was I saying there, John?
You're just giving me the history of how we got to of the field before you arrived, and then started proposing theory.
Yeah, sorry, I was saying I always started with humans and then argued outward. So reciprocal altruism, I really started with friendship. I said, well, wait a second. Yes, relatives are important, but friends are important too.
Yeah.
And it can be more important in some ways. And so how do you model that? Well, the most fundamental way to analyze it is simply reciprocity. I do something nice for you, and hopefully you do something nice for me. And if benefits are greater than costs, then we both benefit. And so you can get an evolutionary argument. Then parental investment sexual selection was the first general theory for the evolution of sex differences, and all sexual species, and that's now cited nearly 14,000 times.
Wow.
So that's one of the top 300 cited papers out of 35 million, you know.
Uh-huh.
So they've grown, you know. Reciprocal altruism is cited 12,000 times. Parental investment, sexual selection is cited 14,000 times. Parent-offspring conflict is cited 4,000 times. Blah, blah, blah. So I had this tremendous opportunity to lay out social theory in a very simple way. And part of my rationale for starting with humans, and then I'll shut up and let you ask some more questions. Part of my rationale for starting with humans is it was usually done the other way around. You spend 40 years studying zebras, and then you sit back and say, this is what I've learned about zebras, and therefore this is what's true of humans. Konrad Lorenz wrote a book on aggression. What was his expertise? Geese.
Right.
Nico Tinbergen did his work. What was his species? Herring gulls. Well, you can study zebras for 400 years, and you still will not know as much about them as you know about our own species.
Right.
You understand? So it's much more sensible to start with ourselves and things we understand at some level fairly well in ourselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've never heard you say that before. So you started with humans, and I remember, so in Wilson's book Sociobiology, which did have a big impact. You've already expressed your reservations about it, but it was mainly about animals, and then a little bit about humans tacked on to the very end. So what I wanted to ask you is whether you were aware going in of how political your work might become, and how political the whole enterprise of trying to give biological explanations for human behavior would become. Were you prepared for that when you started publishing your papers?
Well, that's a good question, John, and I'm not sure I can answer it because my memory is not as sharp as maybe it once was or ought to be. I will say that I did not want sociobiology to be published because I was flying underneath the radar, as I thought of it at the time. In other words, I was doing these fundamental papers and nobody was being galvanized against me yet.
Right.
But I knew they were. So Ed let the cat out of the bag, especially because he added that chapter on humans, which was, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't very well thought out, and it wasn't very strong. The book itself was poorly thought out at a theoretical level. Theory was never Ed's strong point, and he was always the group selectionist himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I read the whole book for him, and I would tell him, you've got to change this, and you've got to change that, but he's typical Harvard professor. They'll have you read it, but that doesn't mean that you're going to affect it,
That's good.
Now, then there was the fact that there was this left wing, there was a pseudo-Marxist, I call him, Dick Lewontin. Dick Levins was more of a real Marxist. And so I was a biological determinist.
Uh-huh.
What the hell is that? Because I'm making an argument from natural selection, therefore I'm referring to genes, therefore I'm implicitly assuming that genes control things. Well, genes don't quite control things, John, but genes are part of every breath we take.
Yeah.
You know that. They're part of how you react to meds, how you react to women or other organisms, Now, we're capable as a species of remarkable levels of change. So this whole gender thing that's blown up in the last 10 years is almost staggering in a way.
Yeah.
especially if you're a genetic determinist, which I'm not. But still, I remember when David Haig published a paper showing that the word sex was disappearing and being replaced by the word gender. And it was strongest in the social sciences and the humanities. This is going down, use of sex. Gender is going up. Biology was going down too, only it was slightly higher up. So, soon enough, you were not allowed to refer to a male, cattle and a female cattle, bull and a cow. It had to be gender, even for animals.
Uh-huh.
Well, I didn't like that at all, but then, damn, I turn around and suddenly gender, you can see why gender might be a more appropriate term.
Yeah.
If you're not XY chromosome, but you identify so strongly with being a woman that you got the better ones are small breasts, just a little bit of breast tissue here, and then you stop taking testosterone. So often, at the very least, you castrate yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that feminizes your phenotype. So the hair disappears and you're softer. But as you know, once you've reached adulthood, there's a whole bunch of things that are not going to change,
Right.
Adam's apple, for example. That's one of the classic ways of telling a transsexual from a, quote, real woman is, but does he or she have an Adam's apple? Because that ain't changing off of the hormones. So anyway, I'm just...
Well, yeah, let me just ask you a follow-up question to that. Didn't you, so, in the chapter that I wrote about you for my book, Mind-Body Problems, and I guess I should say now that you're one of the 9 major subjects of this book I published just a month ago called Mind-Body Problems, Science, Subjectivity, and Who We Really Are. And I confess that I was one of those knee-jerk lefty critics of what I thought were excessively biological theories of human behavior. And the reason was because I was aware of how biological theories have been used in the past to justify racism and sexism and imperialism, all those bad isms. So don't you think that there was some justification for Lewontin and Stephen Jay Gould and people like that to be very wary of sociobiology and evolutionary psychology?
Well, if you want to name those terms, sure, be wary of them, just like I'm wary of evolutionary psychology to this moment.
Right.
The environment of evolutionary adaptation is nonsense. That's pretending that we evolved to be hunter-gatherers for 2 million years, and that time since we invented agriculture about 8 to 10,000 years ago, and animal husbandry, whatever it was, similar time, has been way too short for natural selection to have come up with anything. That is nonsense, and we have the data. And I will be lecturing at Texas A&M 2 weeks from now, God willing, on recent advances in human evolutionary genetics. And you can show that there's been very strong selection in the last 40,000 years and peaking. In other words, it started rising and then it hit a peak about 8,000 years ago, and then it came back down. Not weaker selection, but our ability to detect it. Never mind why.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I think you get naive people claiming that their work is more fundamental and more important than it really is. And, you should be suspicious of it. As for racism, sexism, and so on. Well, I'll tell you my view on sexism. I'm tired of reading arguments, and I come across them all the time, or not all the time, but frequently, and my own work being misrepresented. They claim, Bateman and Trivers claim to have shown that women are more promiscuous than men are. No, if you go back to what I mentioned at the very beginning, Fisher's sex ratio theory shows that the two sexes are equally numerous and equally strong, and there cannot be an average difference between the two sexes in promiscuity insofar as a promiscuous act by an individual in one sex is almost always a promiscuous act by another individual in the opposite sex.
Right.
Now, the distribution may differ. So if you've got prostitution, then you have some women who are having sex with maybe 1,000 men per year. And so you could have a huge bump in promiscuity and then spread out those prostitution acts among a variety of men. So the variance would differ, but the average difference there cannot be an average difference.
Right. By the way, you started that by saying people are citing you to say that females are more promiscuous than males. You meant males are more promiscuous than females, right?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I did. I apologize to every woman, man, woman, child listening, but especially the women. Yeah, I revert things frightening amount of the time.
No, your work is often cited, or evolutionary psychology is being cited, for example, by people who are saying why in engineering and technology the numbers are skewed towards males. So, for example, at Google, only about 10% of the workforce is female, and there are people who are writing that evolutionary psychology has shown that because of the environment in which we involve, women care more about people and men care more about things. This is kind of the popularization that's going on. I assume that you've seen some of this stuff as well.
Sure. And I should have finished the point I was actually trying to make, which is I will read arguments in which the two alternatives are women are inferior to men or women are equal to men. So the good people, the feminists, the socially conscious organisms like you, they're all arguing for equality. So I say, no, you've left out a third alternative. Women are superior to men intellectually. And I'm happy to lay out the evidence for that because I study genetics and genetics of the two sexes and neurophysiology. So, for example, we have two halves to our brain, as you know, left and right hemisphere, and they're connected by the corpus callosum, which are these cells that will transmit signals between the two halves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is the corpus callosum equal sized? No. Corpus callosum is larger relative to brain size in women than in men. That means that women are expected to use their brains more symmetrically. Do they? Yes. We have very good fMRI data showing that when you set up men and women to solve the same task, verbal and an arithmetic, but they're set up so that there's no average sex difference, then it turns out that if you do fMRI work while they're solving it, women are lighting up in both hemispheres more often, whereas men are more likely to light up strongly on this portion of this hemisphere, and not at all, I'm overstating it, less so on this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the most recent work shows that if you look at the fibers that cross between the two hemispheres, in women, the sexually dimorphic ones, the ones that are more in women than in men, are more highly cognitive.
Mm-hmm.
So in higher cognitive capacities, women are sharing their data between the two halves. All right, so what, you say? So what? Interesting little trivia, but so what? Well, this is entirely speculation, but since everybody else, since others are as well, we know that symmetry gives you added powers. So the fact that we have two ears focused forward means that we can locate a sound.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that personally because I'm nearly deaf in this ear through either bacterial or viral infection, and killed off the cilia. And consequently, I cannot locate the direction of a sound. In Jamaica, if someone's calling to me, I yell at them. I say, wave your arms up and down. And then I do this. Oh, hi. And I walk toward them, right? So we also know the same thing is true of visual overlap, that by overlapping with our two eyes, we could be some of these birds where there's very little visual overlap, right? One is seeing this way, one is the other, so they see around the corners more than us, but they don't overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Visual overlap gives us 3 dimensions. So symmetry often gives us a new quality that is absent otherwise. So that scares me. I used to joke about it when I lectured on it. I said, that scares me. We know that women have been selected to be more socially astute and alert than men for the simple reason that we're physically stronger and we have not been above using our physical strength in an abusive or controlling way, period.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that just occurred the other day. That's something that's been around for undoubtedly millions of years.
Mm-hmm.
We know that sexual dimorphism goes back at least 17 million years in our lineage, with males larger than females. So, and since due to Fisher's sex ratio theory, we know that selection pressures are equally strong on the two sexes. We know that if you and I are messing up with women, using our physical advantage to our own advantage, that's going to select in women for cognitive powers to manipulate us, to see through us,
Mm-hmm.
to look over there at Horgan and say, I don't give a shit what that hooker says. Oh, sorry. I'm not allowed to say that.
You can say whatever you want on this show.
Oh, I can? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever I just said. I don't care what that sucker is saying. I can tell from his eyes and his brain and his this and that he's really so-and-so.
Right.
So I warn, I get a laugh out of audiences. I know when I gave the Tinbergen lecture at Oxford, and I said, this is for the young men in the audience. I said, if you've been going out with a woman for 6 months and she doesn't know you better than you know yourself, you're going out with a slow woman. So I've contemplating writing a short book, That's all I'm capable of these days anyway. On, are women biologically superior to men? Let's stop having this lopsided argument where we only got 2 choices. They're equal or they're inferior.
Right.
Here's why they're not inferior. Forget that. Let's go to the other side. So anyway,
I think you should write that book because I think it would be. I think it would really take off. I think you could have a bestseller on your hands. I just want to point out one of the ironies of the kind of left wing criticism, let's say Marxist criticism of evolutionary and genetic theories of human behavior, that you yourself are not exactly a right wing ideologue. So one of your best friends was Huey Newton, one of the founders of the Black Panthers. And when we spoke in Jamaica, and this is also in your books, you talked about how important the civil rights movement was to you and how outraged you were by the abuses against African Americans in this country going back to when you were a very young man. So I just wonder if you can talk about that, how this scientific way of looking at humans is not in any way inconsistent with social justice and progressive politics and this sort of thing. Not to put words in your mouth.
Well, I mean, I could, but it's.
Oh, Bob, you just went off the screen.
Sorry.
There you are.
Yeah, I just sat down after having adjusted the screen to standing up. Well, John, race is something I've been conscious of way from childhood for reasons I won't go into or bore you with. And for certain reason, I identified with Black people way, way, way before I discovered biology or whatnot, you know. The first woman I fell in love with was a beautiful African-American woman from Atlanta, Georgia. And in many ways, I used to joke that her parents were higher class than mine, although my father was a diplomat. My mother had been a graduate student at Radcliffe when they met. Carol later got a PhD from Harvard, and so on. But I can tell you in 1963, 64, in Cambridge, Boston, you could not walk around like a loving couple, you know, with your arm around her and just chatting with her or what. You had to walk like a soldier. You had to walk straight ahead and eye everybody. And just to make him clear, don't use that word and don't fuck with me because I'm not going to tolerate it. And the only time we heard it was once, you know, a group of high school boys going by in a car.
Right.
So they call out. Now, I had been a boxer at Andover, 16 to 18, and it was the only sport that I excelled at. I played almost every Jesus sport there was, growing up partly in Europe, skated, you know, every sport I would play a little bit. I even learned to throw a knife so that it looped over once and then hit the target. You got to practice a lot, trust me. And you always have to fling it from the same distance. But never mind, I didn't pursue anything, but boxing I did. And it had to do with the fact that I was bullied when I was about 14 in Berlin by a big, you know, bully, American guy, because I had talked to his girlfriend. He knocked me to the ground in front of everybody, and everybody laughed. He didn't hit me, he just grabbed me and just flung me down. And I got up and I snuck into the library so people wouldn't know what I was doing. And I got out Joe Lewis's book, something like The Natural Way of Boxing or How to Box, whatever his basic book was. And I started doing push-ups. And then, so I was, you know, boxing Joe Louis style before I got to Andover. Well, Andover had a boxing team. And so in the winter, I boxed, you know. Now, this is Andover where they got to protect you. So you wore a helmet and 16-ounce gloves. not 8-ounce club. So, but still, you could, you could get a nice hit or two. So I was aggressive in that way and willing to back it up with fighting. Now, as life has gotten more dangerous down here in other ways, as I told you, I've taught myself. I took 3 months of lessons from Filipinos. They're the masters of martial arts with cutting tools. So I'm very, very adept with a knife. I don't know how you got me off on that topic.
My original question was your interest in social justice, especially for African Americans, and your friendship with Huey Newton, and the irony of this, considering that lots of critics of evolutionary theory, evolutionary biology as applied to humans, say it's all a right-wing plot.
Well, they're full of shit.
Okay.
It may be used by the right wing. I don't even know. I don't have time to concern myself with this,
Yeah.
Let me give you an example that's occurring to me while we're talking. Now, this is not the easiest one to explain in the world, but again, people can have two different reactions to my theory. This is so-called honor killings. Did I tell you I'm working on them?
You only mentioned it briefly, so yeah, tell me more.
Well, okay. Maybe when this ends, I'll send you my 7 pages and my 10 photos. And again, I'm trying to outline a short book on the subject.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would be a bestseller like one on our women superior.
Right.
But I believe I've, quote, solved the problem in terms of the evolutionary genetics of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, I can imagine there'll be people that are saying, what? Evolutionary genetics? You're saying natural selection has favored this kind of atrocity? But, if you're interested in fundamental theory, John, then by definition, you ought to be interested, especially in things that appear to contradict your theory at its deepest level. So, for example, and let's hope I get back on the main point, which is honor killing. 40 years ago, I don't think I had any special interest in male homosexuality, but I did as an evolutionary problem because it appeared to contradict the adequacy of evolutionary logic based on natural selection, based on leaving maximum surviving offspring.
Yeah.
How is getting in bed with another man and so forth and so on, maximizing your surviving offspring? Well, initially, as you know, before gay people came out of the closet, many did reproduce. They would marry, and I knew one guy, I met him once hitchhiking and got chatting with him, but in any case, he had been married and had 2 children. But that didn't mean he didn't leave, 2 or 3 times a month to go out to a gay cruising area, right? But then once they're out of the closet, then you're free to live man to man. You're even free to marry. Free to have a husband and a wife, or a husband and a husband, however you play it. So that tends to decrease your reproduction, right? Because you're fully expressing your homosexuality. So I've kept up with that literature for 40 years, and it's fascinating findings. There's no question that male homosexuality has genetic components.
Right.
There's no evidence that female homosexuality does. It is true that if you're lesbian, then the chance that your sister is lesbian is about twice as great. It's up to like 12% or so, or 12 or 10%. whereas your chance of being lesbian is about 2%. So your sister, so if you're lesbian, in any case, it's elevated.
Right.
But you share the same social environment with her, so it doesn't correct for social environment. Whereas for male homosexuality, it's not just your brother who's more likely to be gay. It's your uncle on your mother's side, your mother's brother, and your mother's male cousin. And the fact that it was first and still most convincingly shown on the maternal side implicates the X chromosome. And we know the region of the X chromosome where one or more genes must be located. Have we isolated them? No, we haven't. We've just isolated markers, arbitrary genetic markers, but not actual genes. So anyway, now honor killing is even worse. You are raising a daughter till she's age 17. She's beautiful, incidentally. Victims of honor killings are disproportionately good looking. And she's at the peak of her reproductive value, the concept I mentioned to you that incorporated age into evolutionary analysis, i.e., her future reproductive success is virtually at a maximum then, because she can soon start breeding and therefore have 5 or 6 children. At age 50, her future reproductive success is gone to 0, but she can aid herself, her past reproduction by being a grandmother and so on. So in any case, why in Jesus' name would you slit the throat of your beautiful daughter over trivia? Lipstick in her purse, phone numbers on her cell phone that you don't recognize. And since you're in a highly kin-biased society, she's only supposed to call kin. So at that point, you'd recognize the number. Being seen in public with a man of a different subgroup and so on. Well,
Hold it.
yeah.
Sorry, my just had to disconnect my my phone.
Yeah.
Go ahead. By the way, I just want to say, when you started talking about honor killings, I wasn't sure what it meant. This is a case where these are people who I assume are generally extremely religious, and the father or the brothers kill their daughter or sister for supposed sexual transgressions. Is that it?
Yes, that's it. Now add the following. It occurs in 2 religions, Muslims and Hindus, all right? Now, there's a different kinship logic, but in both cases, inbreeding is involved. In the Muslim case, there's a strong emphasis on marrying your first cousin, and not just any old first cousin, but a patrilineally biased first cousin. So it's your father's brother's child, not your father's sister's or your mother's brother. Most cousin marriages across the world are cross cousin, in which the parental generation, the sex is reversed. But in countries that come out of Saudi Arabia and the Muslim world there, it's father's brother. So you're right about the father being the killer. Then you mentioned brothers. Yes, sometimes. But uncles, the father's brother, is very common.
Huh.
Here's the essence of the argument, if I can bore you with a little bit of logic for a second. You're related to your first cousin by an 8, okay? So you can show that by marrying him or breeding with him, your degree of relatedness to your child goes up from 8/16, i.e. a half, to 9/16. It goes up by 1/16. So it goes up by roughly 6 to 8%. You're more related.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's advantageous to you, other things being equal, because there's more of your genes in the organism that you're investing in. However, as you know, having more of the same genes is bad for your phenotype. Outbred offspring in almost every species. My God, corn. We have beautiful data from corn showing that here's the size of the corn if they're outbred, and now we start breeding them, sideways,
Mm-hmm.
and it drops down here, and after 7 generations, you ain't got any offspring at all. Your height is diminished tremendously. So in plants, animals, and so on, it's outbreeding. Inbreeding depression is the common term. Now let's look at the matter from your father's standpoint. He's related to your child, which is his grandchild, by a quarter. But if there's a first cousin involved, he's also related by a quarter because he's related by an eighth, because he's related by a half to his brother, who's the father of the first cousin, and then half.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an eighth. So his degree of relatedness goes up from a quarter to an eighth. That's a 50% increase in degree of relatedness. So he's much more willing to tolerate harm to the phenotype of the child. I'm not talking about the killing yet, i.e. encourage the first cousin mating because of his jump in degree of relatedness. You get me?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Hindus are different. We have excellent genetic data that they've been inbreeding for 3,000 years, but it's within caste,
Mm-hmm.
caste system. So, and of course, the worst thing you can do is be an upper caste woman who allows a man who's one caste below her to marry her.
Right.
Then you lowered your caste,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got photos of such a murder. So the logic is a bit different, and there's another difference. In the Muslims carry the honor killing with them.
Mm-hmm.
So in the pictures that I can send you, there's a dreadful one with an Egyptian father who murders his 18 and 17-year-old daughters in the back of a taxi, shoots them to death. And he still hadn't been caught. He's still on the FBI most wanted list. They think he might have escaped to Mexico and then on to God knows where. Arizona, guy runs over his daughter with his car. Then he turns around and runs over her a second time. Yeah.
Jesus.
Just gruesome, Now Hindus, grotesque crimes, including multiple raping. Like if she's dishonored her caste, her 3 brothers will all rape her successively while she walks around naked in the village. I mean, it's just dreadful torture, before they then slit her throat. But when they move to the U.S. or whatnot, they don't bring it with them at all.
Yeah.
Because the person that determines the honor killing is the village headman or something like that. And you see, when you move to Dallas, there ain't no headman coming with you.
Right.
That ends. But if you're Muslim, since it's the family structure is still there. So anyway, I don't know why I went off on that. I'm not sure.
Listen.
Sorry, let me.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead. Finish the thought.
Yeah, just finish because you're asking about concerns, I think, about political reactions. Here's a case where people have warned me, you better watch it when you lecture on this in public. First of all, Muslims in the audience are not going to be happy. Hindus may not be happy. God knows who else ain't going to be happy.
Right.
But I don't, I'm not sure it speaks well of me, but I don't care, and I will go my own path. I would rather identify with the victims and try to solve something regarding the evolutionary logic, the underlying logic, and think and hope that might help us to get the thing under control. I don't know. Might be very naive.
Hey, I wanted to ask you something that that I meant to ask you when I visited you in Jamaica, and we didn't get around to it. And that's your view of religion and God. I think at one point in your autobiography, you talk about reading the Bible now and then. And I'm just curious. Let me just ask you straight up, do you believe in God? Do you have any kind of religious belief at all?
Well, I find the older I get, the more I turn towards prayer and meditation.
Mm-hmm.
That's partly because nothing else to help me. As I've told you very honestly, I am very, very solitary and lonely since I was driven out of Rutgers. And I think I should have fought them more strongly because there was a whole community of people.
Yeah.
Including yourself, whom I didn't see very often, but when I did, it was very pleasant, and you were nearby.
Mm-hmm.
My 3 daughters were all in New York City, so they were an hour's ride on Jersey Transit.
Mm-hmm.
My son lived in Somerset. I would lecture to 30 students, The biology department had many, many colleagues that were very friendly to me. Now, the administration hated me, and that was more Zionism. That's more the Zionist plague, if you will, which I'm not pleased with at all. But I should have fought them more. So anyway, I do meditate. I've meditated for many years as a way to sleep and get my nap,
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a less religious time in my life, I would meditate by dropping down to Jamaica and walking around and looking at all the little trees I had planted. And then I would fall off to sleep. Now, I was raised very, very religious. My mother, the only damn book I read until I was 11 or 12 was the Bible. Mm-hmm. I didn't read the Hardy Boys. I didn't read Nancy Drew mysteries. I didn't read all that nonsense. But I knew the 4 Gospels, and I knew Ecclesiastes, and I knew a few Psalms. That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a hell of a lot further along now. Now, there are times now, John, I'm being very frank, and then maybe I'll stop being so frank.
Too late.
There are times now where I will cry out, oh my God, forgive me, or oh my God, spare me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, do I think anybody's listening? I'm very, very doubtful on that score.
Mm-hmm. So
the notion that you can sit down at night and chat with God strikes me as utter nonsense. God is, if he or she exists, and I used to joke by my latest calculation, God is 2/3 female and 1/3 male. It's what was I saying? God.
I mean, so you believe sort of sometimes? You believe enough to pray, even though you're not sure anybody is listening.
Yes, and right. And I often think that prayer, you're talking to yourself, or you're talking to a side of yourself, you know, that God, as I say, herself is taking time out from running the universe to listen to me
Right.
is utter nonsense. Um, so I don't know what my religion would be. I don't go to church because I regard preachers as being so fraudulent.
Mm-hmm.
Black churches are, they're resting their hand on your forehead and saying, "Come out, wicked spirits, come out!" You know, and all the congregation is yelling and believing that this sucker can. Hi, Stacy Ann.
So you're going to hell.
There's a waitress saying, "I'm going to hell." Oh my God! Yeah, I'm already there, baby. So, on the other hand, I like Richard Dawkins says he's an atheist. I don't believe in that. I'm much more in the world of the agnostic, which is to say, I don't know. No, sir. It's too complicated for me. But to be an atheist is to come to a specific conclusion. And that's as hard to wrap your mind around as God created the universe 15 billion years ago and started it running,
Yeah.
To say that the whole thing appeared out of an explosion and that's it. I don't know. I've got nothing of value, I don't feel, to quote teach or tell people on that topic.
Well, I'm glad. I feel the same way that you do. I haven't found a conception of God that makes any sense to me. Not a God who performs miracles and listens to our prayers and does nice things for us if we're good and punishes us if we're bad. That doesn't make any sense to me. But the idea that all this, life and the human history, the great adventure is just random, just is I find incredible also.
Well put. I think we're on the same page, whatever the hell the page is.
Well, I just want to remind you that the program that this interview will be appearing on is called Meaning of Life TV. And Meaning of Life. Yeah. Anyway, so we've been talking for about an hour, so I guess it's about time to wrap things up. But I just wanted to ask, I know you're looking for opportunities. You would still like to teach again. I know you lecture a lot back in the States, but you're looking for a chance to maybe have a position somewhere and do some teaching. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm looking for a community. I'm looking for a place in a community. And, the humbler, the better. A major university is not interested in a 75-year-old man. And that's what I am now. But I'm my fantasy is that a humbler school would be perhaps more interested in having someone of my caliber and also fame, I think, I was introduced in Zagreb, Croatia for my talk on recent advances in human evolutionary genetics, and a wonderful guy. I loved him. So he introduces me by saying he's the greatest living evolutionary biologist. And the reason for that is the others are all dead. And I thought he was right on, you know. The only one that I thought was greater was Bill Hamilton, and he's been dead now for 18 years.
Right.
You know, George Williams was great, but he was not quite me. Maynard Smith, forget about it. It was several years ago, John, that someone wrote me and said, do you realize that parental investment in sexual selection is neck and neck with an ecology paper as the most cited paper in all of evolutionary biology? And I didn't. I never followed it, you know, that whole business. Now I check on citations, you know. I'm on ResearchGate, and you can, or yes, Google Scholar, and I can find out whether my citations increased or not lately. So that's extremely gratifying. The first general theory for the evolution of sex differences in all species is alive and well,
Yeah.
which means it's generating still more and more, you know, I almost said tentacles, but, you know, more and more tributaries or more and more connections, you know. And, well.
Yeah. Power to you. I would think a lot of schools would be really fortunate to have you in residence. I want one final question I want to ask, and it's kind of a tough one. This is something that I wrestled with when I was writing the book, and I sort of asked different people, but I don't think I put it to you very, very bluntly. You know, so you're someone who's thought very deeply about human nature, and you've tried to look within and, you know, sort of within the species and figure out what's going on, and you've had these very powerful ideas. Does that kind of knowledge translate into, I don't know, practical wisdom for living your life as a human being? When you're not a scientist, when you're a husband, when you're a father, when you're a friend, all those human relations. And this is a question about you personally, and also other intellectuals you know. Sort of, how does scientific and intellectual knowledge translate, if at all, into practical wisdom?
Well, I mean, one thought that came to mind immediately before you finish your question is that one distressing feature of my psyche is that I repeat the same effing mistake over and over and over again. Same mistake. I have a spiteful side which will respond to spite right away with counter spite. That ain't reciprocal altruism, that's reciprocal spite, which doesn't pay, and it manifestly doesn't. I'm almost always aware of it, you know. So now I'm conscious to this point, and this doesn't come out of science really, but, you know, just watching yourself. I'll be about to do something spiteful in return, and a voice will come to me and I'll say, Bob, you've done this 623 times, and every single time you've regretted it. Then comes back a stronger voice that says, no, this time is different. And there goes 624. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
By the way, back to kinship and friendship for a second. There are two aspects about kin that are interesting that usually don't get emphasized. Since your relatives have a vested interest in you, friends don't in terms of their inclusive fitness. So if you're screwing up, doing cocaine or living a stupid California lifestyle, I've been there, then they could, in principle, come to you and angry because you're lowering, you're effing up. And they're related to you by a half, and your children by a quarter, and you're effing up. So you're harming them, right? So they have a vested interest in you. I forget the second point, but I know that friends, my experience is that friends are more valuable in counseling me because they're detached from the feeling I have. So then we'll go back to the spiteful thing.
Yeah.
Talking to this very good Jamaican friend of mine who lived in New Brunswick. This was 5 or 7 years ago. And he said, "What's up?" I said, I'm about to leave a unpleasant message on so-and-so's answering machine as a woman. He said, "Why are you going to do that?" I said, "She left an unpleasant one on mine." And he said, "So what?" And I said, "Well, it hurts." He said, "Well, so what?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "By acting that way, you're just going to make it worse.
Right.
You're going to get another one from her. It's going to be worse than the one that pissed you off, So just forget it. Just break the Gordian knot,
Right.
I came off the phone and I said, "Thank you, Jesus." And did not do it. And then I was meditating on the fact that a friend is in a unique position to do just what he did. They care about you, but they do not suffer the feelings you're suffering. So they couldn't care less about the feelings.
Yeah.
Deal with feelings, Bob. Just stop self-destructive behavior. And I think there's an argument for why kin are less reliable at that. Partly that they have a self-interested stake or whatever. But in any case,
The friend can be like your better self, ideally.
What's that?
The friend can be like your better rational self.
Yes, and contemplate. Well, the sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
The Dawkins called it the Concord fallacy. There's the poker rule: don't throw good money after bad.
Yeah.
Bad money is your money that's in the pot, but it's gone. So you don't owe that money the debt of losing more money.
Right.
That's where he steps in and says, "But Bob, all you're going to do is make this worse."
Yeah.
So cut it. All right, John, it's real nice talking to you. Please get me the job. I'll be eternally grateful.
Okay, I'll do my best. Hey, thanks a lot for talking to me, Bob. It's been great. And I hope to see you back in the States again one of these days.
Well, I do too, and I'm going to be in the New York area. I have twin daughters whose birthday is December 22nd, and there'll be a party probably in Mount Vernon. And if so, I'll probably be coming up to Jersey, ahead of time. Anyway.
Okay.
Nice to you, John. You're looking good.
Yeah, you too, Bob.
All right.
All right, talk soon.
Yeah, bye-bye.